Welcome to the first episode of Lead with Bubba Scott, where we explore leadership with leaders from all walks of life. I'm your host, Bubba Scott, and I could not be more thrilled to kick off our first episode with Dr. Joe Thomas, a retired Marine Corps officer, world-renowned leadership scholar, and the director of the James B. Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership at the United States Naval Academy. Let's get it. It's great to have you on the show, Dr. Joe Thomas, the director of the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership at the Naval Academy. Thanks so much for being here.
It's my pleasure and my honor to speak with you today, Bubba.
It's great. This is our first episode, and I had the intent of leading with a backdrop of how people actually instruct and teach leaders to be successful in the future. And I can't think of anyone better to get this show started. So thanks so much. Just go ahead, tell us where you're from, what your background was like, and ultimately, we know that you enlisted in the Marine Corps at the age of 19. So what's your background? What was that like growing up, and what led you to enlisting in the Marine Corps?
Yeah, it's a really maybe interesting question in that, and I can't quite put a finger on as to why this is, but I kind of knew from a very, very early age that I was going to be a Marine. For some reason, I had it in my mind that that was the thing to do. There's no obvious explanation for that. Yeah, there were Marines in my family. There was also Army in my family and so on. Really small town in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania, Hockendakwa, Pennsylvania. The running joke is there's more letters in the word Hockendakwa than there are people in that town. Not exactly true, but it sounds good. In fact, my wife is from the same town, 2 blocks away in this small town. But again, I really did know from a fairly early age that I wanted to do the Marine Corps. I wasn't necessarily sure that I would do it for an entire career. So when I enlisted with a high school diploma and no plan, I let the events take their course, and more or less was voluntold into one opportunity after another, after another, after another. And next thing you know, well, we had a whole career going. And I was very, very fortunate in that my wife and eventually sons, who 2 of the 3 became Marines themselves, enjoyed the ride as well. So yeah, the Marine Corps is kind of our family business. And I'm very, very grateful for every opportunity that I was voluntold into along the way.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think it's wild how the Marine Corps is able to build this image in our heads as young people that it's like, I don't know why, I don't know when it started, but I saw a Marine one day and I just decided that's what I was going to do. So that's incredible, and it's a similar story to a lot of leathernecks that I know as well. So you mentioned you ended up doing a career. So you enlisted. What was your path to becoming an officer, and what was the decision process there?
Yeah, well, the first opportunity that I didn't really plan on that was presented to me at the MEPS, actually, the place where all the recruiters take you and they put you through a battery of tests, and then they eventually get you for your physical and all those types of things. But I qualified for a thing called the Combat Arms Education Bonus. So it was an unexpected, unanticipated kind of tranche of money that I was able to use for college purposes. And again, that was the first of a number of things. And then really across the balance of my career, even after graduating with an undergraduate degree from a school up there in my hometown area, Muhlenberg College in Allentown, Pennsylvania, educational opportunities just kind of presented themselves along the way. And it really wasn't my intent. As mentioned, being from a small town, maybe my one and only real objective was not merely getting away from that little town. It was really to see the world. And I had some really good fortune in being able to do that, being stationed in Okinawa for several years, med cruises, Westpac cruises, and deployments and so on. So I kind of scratched that itch. But then when opportunities to pursue other degrees, 2 masters, one at Syracuse University, one at the Army War College, and then ultimately and eventually a PhD at George Mason when I was down at Quantico, those types of things I did not foresee. And as odd as it sounds, I didn't necessarily pursue on my own, but rather was very, very fortunate in having good mentors and people in my career, in my life, who nudged me toward all of these opportunities. And it's kind of through those doors, then walking through those doors, that led to my current career path in higher education, which we get to, I guess, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is wonderful to see as a young person. Looking back on it, it becomes clearer. But when you're going through it at the time, you don't really notice it, the impact that those individual mentors can have, whether it's someone, like you said, I think makes a lot of sense, gently nudging you towards an opportunity that then you're able to recognize as a good one and pursuing. So is there any mentor in particular that when you were a junior officer or maybe when you were enlisted that made a big impact on you and help you, whether it was transitioning from the enlisted side to becoming an officer or if it was transitioning into academia?
Well, I've had some great bosses along the way, I have to say, and otherwise mentors weren't necessarily bosses, but for one reason or another took a vested interest in me and helped guide me toward these opportunities. There's many I could talk about, but since I'm sitting here, as you mentioned, at the Center for Ethical Leadership, named for James B. Stockdale here at the Naval Academy, the person who I replaced in this role was one of the great mentors in my life, a guy by the name of Colonel Art Athens. He was a class of 1978 for the Naval Academy here. We were in kind of a similar career path. He preceded me at Marine Aviation Weapons and Tactics Squadron 1, MOTS 1 in Yuma, Arizona, in a couple of different courses that we taught in that program. As he rotated out, I rotated in. I taught like instructional techniques. I was the person who came on not long after Art left MOTS 1. I rolled in and took over this, what at least seemed to me at the time to be a high pressure course, because this squadron, the whole purpose was to put on weapons and tactics instructor courses twice a year that prepared primarily aviators, but really any MOS to take the lessons of this very intensive part classroom, part field experience and become yourself an instructor in your home units, squadrons or battalions out there in the fleet. And the instructor preparation course was viewed by some, certainly by me, as that key thing, teaching young Marine officers, young captains, some majors maybe, but mostly captains, how to be instructors themselves back in their home units. So Art Athens taught that for a while. I fell in on that afterwards. I got to know Art through that process and in later things in the fleet, and then followed him into two different jobs here at the Naval Academy. So it might have just seemed like happenstance, maybe, that I would keep following him, but I do believe it was due in large part to his vision for succession planning and setting me up for success and kind of drawing me along on a path which put me following in his wake into three different roles. I often also joke that shows my poor judgment, because Art Athens, for anybody that actually knows him, and he's quite a sought after speaker on a national level. He's really, really talented guy. He put down some tracks for me to follow, but his shoes are so large that I feel I could never really catch up quite to that standard. And that was always my aspirational goal, to just try to do a little bit of what Art had accomplished prior to. And in that way, he's not only a mentor, but he served as an inspiration to try to meet that same bar. And again, my role that I've been in now for, 7 years as director. I was his deputy for a time as well, about 18 months as his deputy. It's been a quest to try to live up to that standard that Art Athens set out there, Colonel Art Athens.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Art Athens, that's about as awesome a Marine Corps name as I can think of. That's incredible. And then, yeah, you talk about that's a very Marine Corps concept of having a senior officer or a senior mentor whose image you hope to somehow fulfill in your own career, and someone who leaves a trail of aspiration for you. And I think it's awesome that you bring up MOTS 1, because you look at, I mean, that is such an incredible place for leadership development in the context of instructorship for aviation. I mean, yeah, like you said, for all warfighting disciplines. And it's what a great place for you to cut your teeth in that regard.
No doubt. I mean, a highly technical place, without question. It's revered in many ways, not just in the Marine Corps, but across the Department of Defense and worldwide in many ways, because of the rigor associated with it. And interestingly, though, didn't just represent technical expertise. And this is the thing that kind of attracted me to Art as well as a mentor. He was a man of very profound character, kind of the whole package. Because, Bubba, you know this well. there's a lot of technical experts out there that are inspiring, that are interesting, that are important in our lives. But I don't want to say rarely, but I'll just say it's less common for those same technical subject matter experts to combine this kind of deeper sense of character as well. And this is, I think, essential to the notion of leadership, that it's about technical competence, but it's also about a strong sense of character. And Art Athens certainly had that. And I don't want to limit it only to art, although art was one of my most important, if not the most important mentor in my life. There's been other people also associated here at the Naval Academy, like John Ripley. There's another giant name, as you mentioned, in kind of the history or the lore of the Marine Corps. John Ripley, when I served as Marine officer instructor at the University of Notre Dame, I would bring Colonel Ripley to Notre Dame to speak at leadership conferences, and he would wow audiences time in, time out. And even when I left that role as a MOI, Marine Officer Instructor in the ROTC department, Naval ROTC department there, I kept in very regular contact with Colonel Ripley and sought his guidance. And even more so when I wound up getting orders to the Naval Academy as a battalion officer, one of the first calls I made after selection to Bado was to John Ripley, because he lived here in Annapolis. And of course, a very famous graduate of the Naval Academy as well, has that iconic status, not only in the Marine Corps, but certainly here at the Naval Academy. And John Ripley essentially held me by the hand, almost quite literally, and walked me through what's most important about this institution, the institution I currently sit in right now, which is the Naval Academy. He understood the essence, the importance, the very importance of the Academy, not just to the Navy and the Marine Corps, but to the nation. And his guidance up to the point that he unfortunately passed in 2008, up to that point, nobody gave me more consistent or better guidance on how to fulfill the various roles that I played here in Annapolis.
Yeah, that's tremendous, and you're absolutely right. It would be difficult to discuss the Naval Academy and the Marine Corps without bringing up Colonel Ripley. But I think, his physical courage, and that could be an episode in itself, just talking
Sure
about his
could.
exploits as as a junior officer in Vietnam. But also, what's incredible to me is that one of the most decorated war heroes in military history, certainly probably the preeminent Marine war hero with a Naval Academy association. I think that would be a hard claim to contest, but that he maintained that level of humility and mentorship. Because you think about Colonel Ripley and you think about his story being something that is taught to young midshipmen to inspire them and to indicate what physical and moral courage can be. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I mean, it's wonderful to hear your connection with him. And I know he played a similar role in my father's life when my father was a lieutenant colonel, and that he was giving so much of himself to the many Marines with whom he had contact as someone on the yard is really incredible. So that
Yeah.
is a fantastic example of a leader and a mentor.
Yeah. And in that end, he was just the consummate gentleman, right? Of the old school, as they say. Just that his manners, his mannerisms, his presence, everything was done in the service of others. And that's something that at times can seem anachronistic, as somehow of another era. But he lived that way. It was genuine. It wasn't forced. And that, to me, in so many ways, provided that great example, or Admiral Stockdale would have said, a noble exemplar in our lives. And Ripley was certainly a noble exemplar to so many over the generations, really.
Absolutely, yeah, and I can't get over how awesome it is, his legacy at the academy, his legacy within the Marine Corps, the
Yeah.
Marine officers and Marines who served under him, who remember him so fondly, but also, as a father and family man, he's got a wonderful family, still a lot of interactions with the Marine Corps still to this day.
Yeah,
But yeah, an incredible Marine Corps family.
no doubt.
We talked about that mentorship. We talked about that gentle nudge that you got, and we talked about a few of your mentors and the role, the impact they had on you. But
Yeah.
um, you eventually, in the mid '90s, you began that transition into leadership education and kind of building, kind of at at the beginning of leadership as a field of study, and
Yeah.
you were there for that in the mid '90s. Can you kind of talk about what that was like, and what it was like to start looking into it back then?
Sure, sure. So following on that tour at Mott's One, I was kind of senior captain when I was there, had just pinned on major. And as the Marine Corps does, and all the services do, you kind of go to professional military education for a year at a time. I find myself back in Quantico, Virginia, on 1 year orders with my family. And I'm going through school toward the end of the program in Quantico. They have a competition of sorts, and it's sponsored by the Marine Corps Association. And the prize for this research competition was $1,000 worth of books from the Marine Corps Association's bookstore. So I thought, "Oh, that's kind of cool. You actually can win something in a competition in the Marine Corps while you're going to school." I put my name in the hat. And actually some work that I had done as an instructor at Mott's One was the use of statistical models to hopefully make more efficient some standard command and control processes that we use to put bombs on target, or to put medevacs helicopters into landing zones and things like that. How do we decrease the time of response from the point at which a young Marine jumps on a radio and calls back for that support to when you could put the bombs on target, or when you could put the helicopters in the zones? So I built this probably overcomplicated system to gain some efficiencies. And I use statistical models to demonstrate, to show, to graphically depict where the inefficiencies were in these standardized processes. So I thought, well, I'm going to pull forward this work that I had already done on a previous tour, enter it into this competition with my fellow captains and majors there in Quantico. And interestingly enough, the commanding general of Marine Corps Combat Development Command was a very salty, very seasoned, a very self-assured lieutenant general by the name of P.K. Van Riper, General Van Riper, also a legendary status. Really an amazing guy. Had kind of been there, done that type of guy, Vietnam vet, and so on. And the reason I point out self-assured is because he could make a debrief seem like a butt chewing better than anybody I've ever heard. And there were a couple others on there to include an Air Force colonel, long since retired, but an Air Force colonel named by the name of John Boyd. John Boyd came to fame as the guy who gives us the Boyd theorem, otherwise known as the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. He used that very simple mnemonic device in the design of weapon systems like the F-16, right? The aviator who could observe, orient, decide, and act, point the nose of that aircraft toward the enemy, would always prevail in air combat maneuvering or dogfighting. And he happened to be one of the judges of this contest.
Insane.
Yeah, yeah. And he was cantankerous. He was just as cantankerous, if not more so, than General Van Riper. And then there was a third person judging this, then Major General Rusty Blackman, who was the president of Marine Corps University. Anyway, it's a very intimidating group for a new major to present this research, and especially since it was kind of packed with numbers and graphic depictions of statistics and so on. I thought I really screwed something up. I think I was the third and final person to go in this competition, and they read me the riot act, and how I was misguided, and I was oversimplifying things. I thought, oh, well, there goes that $1,000 worth of books. It was a good try. Anyway, afterwards, I was called to McCittick, to this Combat Development Command, to meet with General Van Riper and Colonel Boyd. And essentially, they not only told me that I had actually won, which was the biggest shock in the world considering how they treated the presentation, but they kind of got around to saying, hey, would this type of thing apply in other settings? Can you take the same approach, kind of a disciplined approach, in using quantitative measures to figure out efficiencies, or even better still, to measure the return on investment of interventions for anything? Command and control processes are just interventions into a system to bring resources to bear, right? At first, I didn't really know what they were getting at. I didn't really know what they were talking about. But to make this long story perhaps a little bit longer, the Commandant of the Marine Corps at the time, General Krulak, had some really strong ideas about leadership development in the Marine Corps. And in question was the purpose of intellectual property rights to a thing called principle-centered leadership, which is a spin-off product of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And Bubba, this may predate you a little bit, but this is coming on the heels of an experiment across the whole Department of the Navy that did not land well, specifically in the Marine Corps, called total quality leadership, otherwise known as total quality management. It just was not a good fit. It's about continuous process improvement in and of itself, a positive thing, a good thing. But when you peddle it as leadership development, it was missing the mark, right? Because it was designed essentially for making more efficient manufacturing processes, which has a place, I suppose, in the Marine Corps, but it's not the main thing. So in the wake of all of that, having the Commandant of the Marine Corps saying, we're going to do principle-centered leadership, let's just say many people were skeptical that this was going to be the right thing to do. So their ask of me was to take these same disciplined quantitative processes to examine, to better understand, to even potentially measure return on investment of leadership curriculum. And in the process of doing that, they said, yeah, I know you have orders to Camp Pendleton, and I would imagine you're probably pretty excited about executing those orders and going to San Diego with your family, but not so fast. They canceled my orders. They put me in a place called Total Force Structure Division. I wrote some congressional testimony for the follow-on commanding general of McCitic for some time. And I was enrolled in a PhD program, specifically in leadership using quantitative methods and other things at George Mason University, just up the road from Quantico. And that began my journey. That was 1995. So 30 years ago now, that began my journey into the field of leadership development, with very, very few exceptions. In that 30-year span, that's all I've been doing. Even while on active duty, I thought about, I wrote about, I taught, I did things in that space of leadership development. It led directly into my second career here, and they made me the offer I couldn't refuse by transitioning from active duty in the Marine Corps to wearing this every day as a civilian employee of the Naval Academy. I've continued along that path, more or less, doing many of the same things that I was voluntold into back there in the mid 1990s.
That is wild. There's so much to unpack there. I think at the bone of it, you were going to go to San Diego, California, and you wrote an essay or you gave a presentation that got your orders canceled so you could be in Quantico. Is that correct?
No good deed goes unpunished. Keep that in mind. I want your listeners to know that. Just when
Yeah.
you think, hey, I'm going to get a free load of books here, $1,000 worth of books. Why wouldn't I put in for this? I've already done all this homework here. I did all this work. This is what I'm doing on my way out the door as we're heading off, smiling in the direction of San Diego. The family was really, really pumped about going to San Diego, only to have that same work and that same victory, and I put that in quotations, that prevent me from actually executing orders to San Diego.
Yeah, that's definitely got a sting. There are a lot of waves that went unsurfed,
Exactly.
But it's pretty wild to think. It totally makes sense, just given the roles that you've had since and the role that you're currently in now, that you would have had overlap with so many legendary characters. I mean, I was not expecting today to talk about Colonel Boyd. I mean, that is wild. Like he is a military Department of Defense, like American legendary thinker, and especially in the world of aviation. So
yeah.
I can't imagine what it was like to give a presentation to him as the junior man on a review board, but
Yeah.
that's incredible. And I will say one more thing about it. It's one of those things that, every organization or every institution, it's not going to get everything right every time, but it is incredibly motivating that those senior guys used their position to identify young talent and to funnel it towards something that could change the game, because that's not like, just to be clear for everybody listening, that is like not a standard career move to do what you did. And it's incredible that they identified that and they let you have free reign to pursue that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And to be really, really clear about it, from that moment, the moment that I just described, everything beyond that, there has been nothing standard about anything that I did either in uniform or since. It really opened a door to some things that I hadn't planned on, and in my head at least didn't really want to do, but somebody understood a little bit more deeply the potential impact of something that wasn't being done, at least at scale at the time, which was thinking, as I mentioned, in a disciplined way, in a very deliberate way about leadership development. Because in fairness, in the 1990s, leadership development was as much about inspirational, motivational speaking and trying to fire up the troops, so to speak. And there was very little examination of the knowledge, skills, abilities associated with leadership, and that they could be measured, and that there were existing psychometric instruments or survey instruments out there that could be brought to bear to show some type of return on investment of things that were done either in a professional military education environment or just an educational developmental environment anywhere. Since you made a surfing reference before, I caught the leading edge in some ways of a wave that was moving in the direction of consolidating this very ill-defined, very broad, certainly interdisciplinary space called leadership development. And that I brought with me at least some hard skills associated with the measurement of competencies, knowledge, skills, abilities, and attitudes, really put me in good standing for opportunities as they presented themselves, which ultimately results in directing the Lejeune Leadership Institute at Marine Corps University and directing the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership here at the Academy.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And you've been hanging 10 ever since on that wave.
Yeah.
So one thing that really sticks out to me is when I reported to the Naval Academy as a plebe back in June of 2011. I was someone who was definitely interested in interpersonal dynamics, but only in the sense that like a young person who hadn't thought in a disciplined manner about it could be. And I quickly, there's like a fundamental experience in my life when I remember at the Naval Academy during plebe summer, there were guys that inspired me to want to be better, and there were people who made me feel terrible, and
Yeah.
who were in leadership positions over me. And of course, like, some of that was by design and some of it was just a young person in a difficult leadership position
Yeah.
struggling to figure out the right answer. But it made a deep impact on me that every interaction that you have with other people is an opportunity to learn something about leadership.
So internal to the yard, we tend to refer a lot to the 47-month process. Why don't we just say the 4-year process? Well, it's actually a little longer because it begins with plebe summer, which is that cultural immersion. One could describe it as scrubbing away those things that we need left at the door and retaining only those things that have bearing on the next 4 years while you're here, and so on, to enculturate you to the place, to enculturate you to the military, to prepare you knowledge, skills wise for the experience, maybe even inject a little bit of resilience into you. I think your experience of observing other midshipmen, perhaps only 2 to 3 years more experienced than you in life, exercising that leadership over you in these environments seemed rather odd, right? That some were really good at it, naturally took to it, and some just were harsh for the sake of being harsh. Well, that's a fair observation. And part of the reason we here at the Academy think of plebe summer more as an opportunity for the detailers, who are those slightly older midshipmen responsible for executing the day-to-day training, right? It's an opportunity for them to put together the program, to execute a program, we might even say, experiment with styles and to see what's effective and what's not effective. And, perhaps in my first year or two, especially when I worked in Bancroft Hall directly with midshipmen as a battalion officer, as an example, I did focus more on plebes at that moment, thinking, we've got to get them prepared for, the academic year and for the next 4 years and so on. But my mindset has shifted over time, and it's not limited to a focus on plebe summer detailers more than the plebes. It also extended as I became course director for the one point or another, both of the core leadership courses taught in the classroom. The plebe year credit bearing core or required, that is to say, leadership course. And then later on, I was the course director for the one taught in second class year or junior year, a 3-credit course that I oftentimes thought of as the flagship course in leadership. I realized pretty quickly through those experiences, in a similar way to my understanding of plebe summer, it wasn't about the midshipmen in the classroom as much as it was about the instructors delivering that material. Yes, the academy is and always has been and certainly will always be about the midshipmen. But in the roles that I've held here over the course of the past 20 plus years now, my principal point of contact is more staff, faculty, coaches, young officers serving as company officers, for example, sometimes the senior enlisted leaders. It's the influencers. And in many ways, that's what made me, I think, a fairly good fit for the role of director of the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership. Because if you think about what this center represents, not just to the Naval Academy, but to the larger Navy and Marine Corps, because we're considered and oftentimes called a think tank that exists here at the Academy, but informs a lot of things that the Navy and Marine Corps do, other government agencies, and in some cases, coalition environments. I mean, we've been responsible for the principal authorship of leadership, ethics, character curriculum for NATO's Partnership for Peace program, which is used by dozens of countries across Europe, in Africa, Central Asia, and so on. And then we follow on the development of that curriculum for organizations like that, for war colleges or service academies around the world. But then we follow it up with actually delivering the material at service academies or war colleges around the world. In just, the past 6 months, I've taught at the Naval Academy of Colombia in Cartagena, at the Service Academy in Sibiu, Romania, across North Africa in various schools in Tunisia, for example. In the next 48 hours, I'll be dialing in to speak to all of the general and flag officers in the Canadian Defense Forces. So the touch point, and it's not attributable to me and what necessarily I bring to the table, but what the Stockdale Center, I think, represents generally. So our leverage points are influencers. Our very mission in so many ways is to impact people who are in this business of leadership development and seeing where we can add most value through our products and services.
I've never thought of the Stockdale Center as a think tank, but that makes a ton of sense to me. That it's at the Naval Academy where you have access to an environment where leadership is being studied by the students and by the staff at all times. So it lends itself to kind of more touch time, but at the same time, you guys are using all of your methods, those opportunities to instruct, to also reach out to other allies and to other military and governmental organizations to help them grow in their own way as well. All right, yeah. So you talked about, there was so much that we just went through that was incredible, but it actually really resonated with me what you were saying about how, I mentioned Plebe Summer and the formative impact that it had on me as a freshman, but you actually mentioned that it's actually a leadership development program for the detailers or the rising seniors who are about to take control of the brigade. And it is a massive growth experience for them. And that's where that dissonance really, like, looking back on it, it's at the time as an 18-year-old, I thought some of these guys were evil, but realistically, they're just struggling to articulate or to demonstrate what they don't know how to translate what they're seeing and what the change they need to see and actually get the results from you. So it is a phenomenal leadership growth experience for them. And I remember very vividly my rising senior year, I was chosen to be the company commander. And that was crazy because, here I am in a company full of people that I respect, admire, look up to, love. And all of a sudden you're in this weird scenario where, like, on the org chart, you're appointed over these guys as platoon commanders and as squad leaders, and we ended up crushing it and performing really well. And looking back on that, it was, you know, if I played a role in it, it was simply to step back and not interfere with my classmates for whom I had so much love and respect, like letting them operate, letting the squad leaders lead their squads. And I was so fortunate. The company commander, who was the Marine officer, he's a former enlisted or prior enlisted recon Marine, huge stud, and he was an incredible mentor to me during that period of time in terms of taking that role that we love to see in Marine Corps officers, which is give guidance, which of course, was the guidance that I was getting as as the like leader, in quotations, but then allowing people who, in my opinion, were more capable than I was as leaders, who were actually at the, friction point as the squad leaders. And, I'll never forget how well they did. It was, we were Lima Company, all my classmates from 21st and 22nd Company, the incredible work they did. And of course, the phenomenal performance of the freshman class, the plebes. So that was such a massive growth point for me as a leader.
Yeah.
And I never really, of course, I was in this mindset where I'm like, every opportunity is a place to learn. But looking at it programmatically or pedagogically, it was that the school has developed that intentionally. Makes a lot of sense. And that's one example of thousands of your work and the curriculum design that you guys have that worked, at least, in this case.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that contribute to that. I would say, Bubba, too, that among the tasks of leaders, perhaps especially in an environment where peer leadership is present, right, which is a particularly challenging form of leadership because you don't have that traditional positional authority or even referent power, right? Deeper understanding, more experience and all that in environments like this. It can be even more challenging for the one aspect of leadership that will carry on throughout your career, which is understand the standard, where the team has to be, right, to accomplish missions and to solve problems, to do all the important things that we have teams and organizations do. Current level of capability and performance, how does one close that gap? Process requires a deep understanding, not only of the technical competencies, back to that notion we discussed earlier, but you really have to understand the human condition thoroughly, human motivation. And the root of the word motivation is motive. So what are the motives that brought people, in the example you were using here, to the academy in the first place, right? To maximize their potentials, one of those things. So using a language and using a light touch, as you've described your approach, right? A light touch, let subordinate leaders lead. I mean, that's really built for peer leadership environments. But even in a light touch environment where the team seems to be clicking along and humming, your ability as the senior leader above that, peer leader or otherwise, doesn't really matter, but to ensure that everybody still understands the guardrails, everybody still understands priorities along this path of trying to close that gap where the team is and where the team needs to be, and gently nudging that direction from point A to point B. If you can master that in this setting, I won't say that all other leadership beyond that is easy by any means, because context matters, and sometimes the context can be even more stressful out there in the so-called real world. But you have built up a base of experience upon which to draw that will always serve you well. I would imagine, going back to 1845, this academy has been referred to as a leadership laboratory. And since you mentioned in the kind of deliberate process of putting together or helping people make more sense of their experiences in leadership roles, such as plebe summer, we can apply this to anything. Team captains of the varsity sports, stripers, as we call them, which are billet holders, formal billet holders during the academic year, such as company command during the academic year, all the way up through brigade command. One of the conclusions I came to fairly early on in this process is that the concept of a leadership laboratory was too easily bantered about. I mean, we talked about it. We didn't really address it at its essence, which, if you think about a laboratory in any other setting, a chemistry lab, what you do in the chemistry lab is by design complementary of what happens in that classroom. So those two experiences, classroom and lab, are tightly woven together. You try to use the same language, you try to use the same concepts so that one reinforces the other. The two are equally important. What I had discovered fairly early on here is that we had a very distinctive language about leadership and ethics and character in the classroom. We built a scaffolding of ideas, a structure of framing of ideas that vast majority of midshipmen intuitively understand. They hear that language. That seems to make sense. It corresponds to my understanding of human motives and motivation and engagement on the job. But oftentimes they would, in the same breath almost, talk about how what they were experiencing or had experienced in plebe summer or were experiencing in the hall somehow didn't jive with the aspirational, theoretical, sometimes abstract conversations in the leadership classroom. So for me personally, probably in the 2006 timeframe, when I first started really thinking about this in a more disciplined way, is how do we give better meaning, right? More sound meaning to the leadership laboratory framing that we provided to everything. And kind of from that point forward through to today, I think many of us, it's not just me, but many of us are trying to figure out ways to weave experience in Bancroft Hall, on summer training, in extracurricular activities, wherever we have midshipmen in that 47 months that they're not actually in a classroom, but doing things. How do we leverage what's done in the classroom, that framing, for those experiences, and vice versa? How do we take observations, reflections from the experiences themselves to better inform the conversations being had in the classroom? To me, that was the gist of what we were trying to accomplish at the very core of it in leadership development here. And of the things that have been added here within Luce Hall, I sit here in Luce Hall at the Naval Academy, which houses Professional Development Division, the Leadership Education and Development Division, Stockdale Center, among other things. The first major additive thing was the development of the Center for Experiential Leader Development, which by design, by charter, is meant to ensure that experience and classroom meld together in a coherent way. Now, I'll also have to add on to that, and this is for you, Bubba, because these are developments that occurred after your graduation, after departing the Naval Academy. We also have observed very carefully best practices from other places in higher education, or in some cases the private sector, whatever. We stood up more recently a Center for Leadership Research and Assessment. So the same thing I described as being part of my early path into this field, the deliberate measurement of return on investment for every intervention called leadership development. We have a structure here now to accomplish just that. We were very, very fortunate to hire a retired Navy captain, a former permanent military professor with a background in industrial organizational psychology. So he understands the measurement of interventions really, really well. He understands psychometric instruments and the collection of data and the housing of data and the use of data, large data sets to make better decisions about programmatics around here. His name is Kevin Mullaney. Really, really capable guy.
He taught me back when I was in school.
Did he? Yeah, I mean, he's, I don't know if your experience in the classroom with him, but I mean, he is an incredibly bright guy. And as importantly, he's got strategic focus on how to prove what we claim all the time. Because we make all sorts of claims that one or another thing around here, whether it be playing soccer makes you a better leader. Instinctively, I want to say yes to that, or lacrosse or football or whatever. Instinctively, I think it's going to build resilience. I think it's going to build mental toughness. There's a variety of things you get out of it. Understanding team dynamics a little bit better, especially in high pressure situations. But we've never really put measures against things like that. We've never even really put measures against serving in leadership billets in the hall. Right? Those company commanders have never really been probed as to how much they were taking from and giving to the organizations they lead. Well, Kevin Mullaney has some really strong ideas about those measures and a really sound strategic plan for layering on measures for every experience across 47 months, collecting that data, housing that data, dissecting that data to make better programmatic decisions.
Yeah, I mean, that is It is incredible to think about how a word like laboratory can become, it can, we say something like a leadership laboratory. And by saying that so many times, we strip that word from its meaning. So looking at your experience at Mott's and then your experience studying it, and then your experience teaching leadership, to break it down, I mean, in the training and readiness manual put out by Mott's, you have classes, you have labs, which are hands-on experiential, and then you
Exactly.
have the actual training evolution itself. And you mentioned chemistry when you were talking about other academic disciplines. A lab is something that augments the class that you took. So by almost stripping it back to what that word actually means, it has given you've taken this opportunity to analyze it like any other subject. And
Yes.
then talking about, Captain Mulaney and of course your backgrounds, looking at how to measure those things. I mean, that it's pretty awesome to just having this conversation, looking back at your experience at the beginning of it to now to see how that's all coming to fruition.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Honestly, it's been challenging, it's been rewarding, and perhaps the most promising thing about it all is your tax dollars are not harmed in what we do here in the Stockdale Center, whether it be the Center for Research and Assessment or Influencer Development Program. This is all accomplished through philanthropically raised resources.
Mm.
So it's alumni, it's supporters of the Naval Academy. There's some corporate money that goes into that, but not much. It's people who understand the potential of an investment in programs like this, who generously give of their resources that enable us to take what would otherwise be good programs here at the service academies, Naval Academy just being one of them, but enables us to not only be great potentially, but world class, right? Leading programs in all of these areas because we do have a very, very talented student body. We have a very talented staff and faculty around here. And now with these added resources, we call it margin of excellence funding from the foundation that's raised, philanthropically raised, we're able to experiment with things and put programs in place. And, I should even mention, we started up a center for coaching and mentoring. And there's not many programs in American higher education who have formalized it with a plan to measure the impact of coaching and mentoring the way that we have. Now, plenty of colleges and universities provide executive coaches or leadership coaches, but we've recently, as we did with the Center for Leadership Research and Assessment, stood up a Center for Coaching and Mentoring, hired a very, very talented woman named Jen Lara, who established International Coach Federation certified programs before, is doing the same thing here and experimenting with learning from formal coach programs. Again, leadership coaching is primarily the focus. I don't want that to be confused with athletics coaching, although there is some similarities and overlap. But we're talking about leadership coaching here that applies to everybody across the board, starting with our staff, faculty, and athletics coaches, extending into midshipmen. We're teaching coaching techniques to midshipmen in the classroom. So these types of things we started with beta tests, piloting programs. We've extended it into more formalized testing of these things, the application of the resources from the foundation that they provided to us. We've built these programs, and honestly, we're right at the precipice of doing some things that frankly just aren't being done other places. And that's what makes it so exciting to be here now and gosh, over the past 20 plus years that I've been here.
Yeah, well, I think we'll have to have you back to chat about what some of those things are that you're right on the cusp of.
Yeah.
I think one thing that really stands out about, those hires that you're talking about is this idea of actually being able to measure these things, because leadership slots in right in one of those places where there are people who are doubtful, right? At least initially, until they're convinced, right, that leadership can be taught, right? There's a reason why that's one of the foundational principles in the first course, but to bring that in, to be able to measure it, to leverage more so than ever, people are respect the concept of like, using data to help inform decisions. So when
Exactly.
you're looking at shepherding, whether it's taxpayer funds or really just the time that you have as a leader and developing subordinate leaders, being able to measure the success rate of those approaches is critical. So
Yeah.
it's pretty incredible that you guys are doing that on the yard.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say that the fact that we were able to embrace a competency-based model, because there's many approaches to leadership development, right? There's many theories associated with leadership development. In fact, one of the criticisms of this field, this interdisciplinary field, is that it lacks a grand unifying principle, and therefore it lacks these broadly agreed upon definitions. Well, on one hand, that is a challenge. Yet on the other hand, I always say context matters a lot. We have a working definition of leadership. Yes, there may not be one that's generally agreed upon as we have in the physical sciences, some generally agreed upon principles and definitions, so on. We have our own here at the Naval Academy, but it's specific to our needs because in social and behavioral sciences, such as is leadership, context has such a strong pull and such a strong vote. So our internally developed definition for leadership works for us. And we're using that as a leverage point then to measure the competencies. Again, competencies being knowledge, skills, abilities, and attitudes that serve that singular definition.
Yeah, it's been incredible to chat and learn about what that arc was at the beginning, your experience, and then the development of leadership as an academic point of study. So we're running up on time. I want to be respectful of your time. So before we go, I've just got two questions for you. One is just going to be if you had to pick one leadership trait or one concept within your leadership toolbox that you'd love to impart on any young leader or aspiring leader, what would that be?
Curiosity. Took me a nanosecond to get that out. I have for a very, very long time thought that as long as you have curiosity, right, we can work with that. There's all sorts of other limitations one might have, but if you're incurious, if you're just not curious about how the world works, I don't care how talented you are, I don't care how smart you are, curiosity enables so many other things as a student, as a leader.
That is a fantastic answer. And then the last thing, you've got a lot of stuff going on. You're a very busy man. Is there anything coming up in the next few weeks or in the near future that you're particularly excited about, be it on the yard or a speaking opportunity that maybe people can check out?
Yeah, well, I mentioned speaking to all these Canadian general and flag officers. It's interesting, but immediately following that engagement, there's one I think it's more important. And you might appreciate this one. The basic school, Marine Corps Basic School for all second lieutenants, their staff is having a character stand down day, a symposium on character development. So Kevin Mullaney, Sergeant Major Grantham here, Master Chief Bertera, who's a SEAL, Lieutenant Colonel Tom Giraldi here at the Stockdale Center. So kind of a team of us from the Stockdale Center are going to go down for this character symposium. We're going to be the keynote kickoff talks for this thing. And then the Marine Corps captains and majors who put on the program of instruction down there for the second lieutenants are going to roll up their sleeves and talk about how do we better understand character? More importantly, how do we assess its development over time? Those are really important questions. And that the Marine Corps is investing in this way at the second lieutenant level, to me, is fascinating and powerful and exciting all at the same time. So I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Again, just talking about the work that you all do that is outside of the Naval Academy. I mean, that is tremendous. That the Marine Corps is bringing you in for that. I mean, what an incredible resource to avail themselves of to have you down there. It's directly into what we were talking about before. Like those are the guys who are training the future leaders of the fleet, and their development is just as critical. And then lastly, as a Naval Academy grad myself, who took a lot of flack in my time at the Marines, even though, after my time as a second lieutenant, I did my best to not talk about it. I know a lot of officers who would disagree with that, but it's kind of nice that some Naval Academy folks are going down to spread the love and let people know what's going on and the special cocktail of leadership that you all have put together up on the yard. So that's
well, Bubba,
that's
I don't have to tell you, the Naval Academy is a national treasure, should be broadly considered as a national treasure, primarily because of the talent that's housed here. The talent, not just in the form of the midshipmen, but staff, faculty, and coaches. And I've long thought that if we can share that, if we could spread that out there, I think we're doing the nation, society a service in doing so. So that doesn't sound too humble when I say it that way. I understand that. But
well,
we
hey,
really
you're a
do have
Marine,
talent.
right?
Yeah, that's
Humility
right.
is critical, but every
It's
now
hard
and
to be
then,
humble.
Yeah, yeah. Every now and then, it's good to let people know. So yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. Super excited for the folks who are going to get to hear from you and your team down in Quantico, and of course for our neighbors to the north. Pretty exciting that they get to hear from you as well. So thanks so much. Would love to have you back on in a bit to talk about some of the things we weren't able to capture. But thanks so much.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure, Bubba, and good luck on this. I love this idea. I love that you're kind of sharpening ideas and thinking here in this format. This is great.
Thank you, sir. Thanks so much for listening to Lead with Bubba Scott. This episode was recorded and edited with Riverside.fm. Theme music developed with Suno AI. If you enjoyed the show, please follow and leave a review wherever you find your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on Instagram @LeadWithBubba and let us know your thoughts in the comments. See you next time.